Thank you, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Miller. I am the Senior Manager of Community Relations at Spoonfuls. We are a food recovery organization based in Massachusetts, and we are based in Eastern Mass, but we work across the state. I'm going to share more about who we are and what we do during my presentation. And I just want to reiterate something that Anna said, which is, as I'm going, if you have any questions, like clarifying questions about what I'm saying, please feel free to drop those in the chat, and I'm happy to try to answer those in real time. And Anna's going to help me kind of keep an eye on the chat for that purpose as well. And then I'm planning to carve out hopefully a couple minutes at the end to address any lingering questions you have. So with that, I will jump right in. The name of our presentation today is Preventing Waste, Feeding People, the Impact of Food Recovery in the Fight to End Hunger. And we've got a few things on the agenda for this presentation. So as I said, I'm going to share more about Spoonfuls, who we are, what we do, why we do it. And then I'm going to talk about what scaling food recovery for impact can look like. And I'm going to use Spoonfuls as an example and sort of walk you through like how we scale and what the impacts of that have been. And I'll speak too about the role of advocacy around the issues that underpin our work here at Spoonfuls and sort of how that's impacted our ability to scale. So a bit about Spoonfuls. We are delivering food with purpose. So we work to keep good food from going to waste. That is the core purpose of our work. And that's done through our food recovery and distribution, our education and advocacy. And as we're working, we're addressing the health, environmental, and economic impact that wasted food has on people and the planet. And this is our why. So why we're doing what we're doing, the issues that are really at the core of the work of Spoonfuls and many other food recovery organizations. So a bit of a primer for folks who are not kind of in this world. About 38% of available food in the United States goes unsold or uneaten every year. And about 90% of that goes directly to waste. So that's a value of over $4 billion of food going to waste. And so there's this massive issue of food waste, 38%. It's not that far from half of food in the US going unsold or uneaten. Meanwhile, here in Massachusetts, 1 in 6 residents are grappling with food insecurity, and there are rates similar to that across the country, as I'm sure many people on this call are well familiar with. And so we've got those two, absurd situations side by side, that wasted food and the rate of food insecurity side by side. That's a really odd juxtaposition there. And then on top of that, there's an environmental impact here. So food waste is the #1 material in landfills. If you go to any dump or landfill, about 25% of what you'll see there is food waste. About 80% of that is perishable food. So the nutrient dense stuff like fruit and vegetables, meat and dairy. And that's taking up a lot of space in our landfills, and it's also emitting methane as it's rotting there in the landfill. So those are some pretty significant issues, and it's why we do what we do at Spoonfuls. We operate with a direct distribution model. So that means the food that we pick up in a day is delivered that same day. So we partner with hundreds of businesses across the state to get good food from where it is to the programs that can use it. In the case of Spoonfuls, our food recovery centers on grocery retail. We work with grocery stores, produce wholesalers, a few farms as well. And we work with a team of ServSafe certified staff. Our team is a fully professional staff as opposed to a volunteer staff, for instance. And they are on the road 5 days per week. And they're operating a fleet of refrigerated vehicles. So that's keeping the food that we recover fresh as it's moving. And we operate in 4 regions across the state. So the food, as I said, it lands on the truck, and then we deliver that food directly to our community partners, community organizations that we work with who, if working with individuals facing food insecurity is part of your mission in one way or another, you could potentially be a nonprofit partner of ours. And so that's food pantries, senior centers, after-school programs, recovery centers, domestic violence shelters, you name it. Like if food recovery is part of their work, they could be a partner of ours. And our partners at Spoonfuls are reaching about 55,000 people each week. So these are the 4 regions we work in. So Greater Boston is where we have our largest footprint. That's where we started many years ago. We're also in Metro West, Worcester County, and Hampden County in Massachusetts, and we're touching about 60 cities and towns. In 2023, we recovered 4.7 million pounds of food in total. We're on track to distribute more this year. And about 70% of what we recover is fresh product. So fruit, vegetables, meat, dairy, the things that are really hardest to come by for individuals facing food insecurity, the things that are often most expensive or hard to get from a food bank or a food pantry, and are often, the most nutritious food. We get asked a lot, why is all of that food out there and available to be recovered? And there are a lot of reasons why. So many of them are represented here. These are the big ones for us. So surplus is a common source of food for us. Food is just culled from the shelves as new product is coming in, old product is going out, even if that old product is still perfectly good, they're more likely to make room for the newest product. So there's surplus or just sort of the random apple here or there getting pulled from the shelf. A lot of what we recover is imperfect, but still good. So the bananas in this picture are a great example. For some people, that's like the perfect banana. That's the banana they want to eat. Or it's perfect for banana bread tomorrow or a smoothie. But if you think about what you see on the shelves in the stores, typically those bananas are green. So these are not the bananas that the store wants to put on their shelves. So we recover them. A lot of what we recover is nearing the date on its label. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I'll say for now, most food date labels are talking about peak freshness. They're not really talking about quality. And so, stores are going to pull things off the shelf as it hits that date, but that food is still perfectly good to eat in most cases. And in some cases, it's for a day or two. In some cases, it's for many days or weeks or even months, depending on what the product is. So we recover a lot of food that's near or at its date and is still perfectly good and food that the community can still enjoy. A lot of the food we recover is made fresh daily. So things like cut fruit or, sandwiches that are made by the deli counter at the grocery store. That's marketed as made fresh daily. The day is done, and so we recover it. And then factory mistakes is another source of food for us. So if you can see this peanut butter jar, that label is upside down. So there's nothing wrong with that container. There's nothing wrong with that product. That is perfectly good peanut butter, but it was not going to go on the shelf in that state. And so that was a very welcome item for our partners when we were able to recover that peanut butter. And we see a lot of products with similar kinds of issues with their packaging. Spoonfuls is a nonprofit 501c3, so that means we rely entirely on philanthropic funds. We don't charge money to pick food up from our vendor partners. We don't charge money to deliver food to our nonprofit partners. So we rely heavily on grants and individual giving and our big fundraising events and the like. And for every dollar that we receive, our team is able to distribute a pound of food. So that's a really kind of compelling number there to really understand kind of where your money is going when you're contributing to Spoonfuls and the work we do. Every dollar allows us to recover a pound of food. So this is our triple bottom line, a little bit more of the kind of why we do what we do and the impacts coming out of our work. So, I talked about addressing food insecurity. We reach 55,000 people with the food that we recover. I mentioned the climate impacts of food rotting in a landfill, the methane emissions, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas emission, very powerful greenhouse gas with very significant impact. So there's that, but there's also sort of everything that has gone into the production of that food. The water and the other resources and the land and the labor even, but, thinking about climate impacts, like everything that the resources that have gone into creating that food, to then waste is a real shame. And so we're able to prevent that waste, both the waste of the food and the waste of everything that's gone into it, as well as, prevent the emissions from that food being wasted. And then finally, we're bolstering the local economy with the food recovery that we do. So we're offering an alternative to traditional waste disposal for the vendors who provide food to us. So, a grocery store, for example, has to pay to have their trash hauled away or their compost hauled away. And we're not charging a fee to take away the perfectly good food that would be thrown away otherwise. There's also tax incentives available. So there's an economic argument there. But then more importantly is that the food that we recover, again, it's going to our nonprofit partners for free. And that's allowing them to take money that they would use to buy food for their food programs and spend it elsewhere within their programs. So there's a, really kind of economic value in the work that we're bringing to the community. So I just described sort of how we operate here at Spoonfuls and the impact our work has on people on the planet. Spoonfuls is New England's largest food recovery organization, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to the reliability that's built into our model. So I mentioned our professional staff. We're, a full-time professional team. So we're able to do what we say we will do consistently and really bring value to our partners consistently. But it's also very operationally complex, and it requires a lot of overhead to make it all happen. So I'm going to dive now into what we've done to successfully scale all of that. And before I get into that, I want to talk about just sort of the potential there is in scaling food recovery. So these apples represent all of the edible food that goes unsold or uneaten in the United States. So there's 10 apples here. And we've estimated here at Spoonfuls that it would take recovering just 40% of this food to feed everyone who's facing food insecurity in the United States. So that's like a pretty significant potential impact there. And when we think about, how many people are facing food insecurity, again, next to that issue of wasted food, understanding where food recovery could come into play there's a lot of potential. So, here at Spoonfuls, we're focused on Massachusetts, but this is like what we know about food recovery at scale and why we are excited about scaling our work and hope others can consider doing the same. So how has Spoonfuls scaled successfully? First and foremost, I think it's by staying useful. So I think it's probably something many people on this call are well familiar with, is that the demand at programs distributing food for free is, as high as it's ever been. It continues to rise to unprecedented levels. And Spoonfuls is providing that consistent, reliable service to support the programs feeding the community. But, when we consider expanding our work into new regions or adding a new route onto our work, we really look to make sure that we're filling gaps where there are gaps to fill. So, we're not the only food recovery organization in Massachusetts. So if there isn't a need for our service, or somebody is duplicating our service, or we'd be stepping on someone's toes, we don't go there. But in most cases, when we've seen an opportunity to expand, we've been welcomed as a value-adding service provider, just kind of lightening the load of, lightening the load of the programs that we are serving, and really kind of augmenting what they would be receiving, for example, from their local food bank. And so really that, like, the utility in what we do and the ability to kind of lighten the load of our partners and, support peers who are doing work like ours or local food banks, is, really why we've been able to expand from one route in the past 15 years to 9. And we've got sort of two expansion routes on the horizon. So, we're really kind of bringing a useful resource into the communities where we expand. We've also grown through our partnerships with local food banks. We have memorandums of understanding with regional food banks in Massachusetts, with a few of them. And for those listening who might be unfamiliar with the world of food banking, many food banks, especially those that have partnerships with Feeding America, will work with their local partner agencies to source food through food recovery. And in most cases, in many cases, it's done, that food recovery is done by that partner agency. So the food bank, the food pantry, for example, but the food bank makes the connection. So the food bank has a partnership with, a local grocery chain, and they say, okay, Stop and Shop, this local food pantry ABC is going to come pick up from you on these days. And so they kind of manage that relationship and pull that relationship together. But Spoonfuls can be a valuable go-between here. And so in places where we have relationships with the regional food banks, we are sourcing that food on behalf of the food bank's partner agencies. So our agreement with the food bank is sort of like, you connect us with the stores or the vendor providing the food, and you connect us with your partner agency, and we will get the food from the vendor to the agency. And we take that off the agency's plate. We take it off of the food bank's plate. And we also, in addition to doing that, what like the agency would ordinarily do, we can also pick up more. So, I think a lot of food pantries who are recovering directly from a local grocery store, for example, are doing so in like their volunteers, like minivan or something like that. But we're operating in a fleet of box trucks. So we can pick up everything that food pantry would have picked up and bring it to them, but we can pick up anything else that they wouldn't have had the room to pick up. So it's really like a boon to the whole network, because we're lightening the load for those who were going to be doing the work anyways. We're bringing more to them or more to other pantries in the region. And so our food bank partners really appreciate that partnership. It's helping us resource their agency partners better, and lightening the load all around. So it's a win-win. And then, in some cases, the organizations that we're working with don't even have a food bank relationship or any other reliable source of food. So we're also supporting under-resourced organizations who don't have those connections. And in those cases, we are often the only source of food for those food programs. So that's really kind of a strong case for funding the work of Spoonfuls, because it's, there's sort of an equity element there, and there's a piece of reaching those who aren't reached by other resources. So it's very compelling argument for kind of supporting the work of Spoonfuls, which then helps us to scale our work. We've also grown over the years by having sustainable funding. So, it's a very important piece in our expansion planning, as we're connecting with people and organizations that we might be working with in new regions. They want to know that we won't come to town, resource them with lots of food, and then leave at some point because money has run out or some other reason. So we won't launch a route without a guaranteed 3 years of funding in hand for that route. And this is to ensure that we can be that reliable partner for that time. And it also kind of gives us some runway to build our funder relationships so that that route can be sustained beyond that 3-year mark. But it's really important to us, building trust with our new partners, that we're coming in with a guaranteed 3 years of partnership, or guaranteed 3 years of Spoonfuls doing the work in the region, and demonstrating that there's some sustainability there. And we also build operational resilience into the way we operate. And that's true of, all of our routes, but also as we're thinking about expanding our work and launching new routes. So, we've got a resiliency truck, as we call it, and that's our backup truck that we use to swap out when other trucks are in need of repairs. So, our programs team, our operations team will say that that's like, feels like it's every single week sometimes. Trucks are trucks and they need maintenance and they need repairs. And then to add on top of that, our trucks are refrigerated vehicles. So they've got reefer units that are, glitchy. And so, we have that resiliency truck to ensure that when a truck is off the road, the route doesn't have to shut down. And, we can keep operating. And we also aim to have more than one person assigned to every route for staffing flexibility. So if somebody needs to be out, the route doesn't have to shut down for the day. And that also kind of builds some, it avoids the team getting burnt out because the literal load is lighter for them. And they can take the sick day when they need to take the sick day or whatever, what have you. So this means that we're really showing up consistently and we're building the trust and the credibility that with our partners, which is really critical to our ability to expand. So I just talked, actually, it looks like I have a question here and I'm happy to, so the question here is, could you go into a bit more depth about your routes? How do you design them? Are they based on both pickups and drop-offs? That's a great question. We sometimes call ourselves a logistics company. So we are very much managing like how to fit the puzzle pieces together. And yes, we consider what the nonprofit partners need or want. So how much product they can take, what kinds of products they prefer or, are limited to taking. And then separately, like what kinds of things we're getting from our donating vendor partners. And so our routes are designed with all of those pieces in mind. And the way the routes function is, the truck leaves the lot empty in the morning and it starts picking up food. And then at some point it will start visiting the nonprofit partners and dropping off food. And there's a design within that route where, the nonprofit partners are being visited after the stores. There's food on the truck. So the nonprofit partners are getting that food. But, the thought is, okay, this vendor has a lot of prepared food that they give us. And this partner likes a lot of prepared food like sandwiches because they're serving an unhoused population, for example. So we're thinking about all of those pieces and using those data points to design our routes. So it's very much about sort of like what's coming in and what's going out. And we use like trucking software to help design our routes as well for like efficiency and how the truck is moving around. But we have a team that's, we have somebody dedicated to our nonprofit partners and somebody dedicated to our vendor partners. And like that team creates routes that work for everyone. How far geographically are you going to rescue? Are you staying within Massachusetts or are you going out of state? So currently we are only in Massachusetts, but we are not limiting ourselves to that long term. Like if there is potential and opportunity and utility in us expanding beyond state lines, we're certainly open to that. We've had inquiries from out of state, so we know that the need is there. So yeah, we are not limiting ourselves to Massachusetts. But right now we are only in Massachusetts. And I mentioned we're planning expansion to 2 more routes within Massachusetts within the next couple of years. Great questions. Thanks, folks. So that was sort of how we operate, how we scale, and kind of all of the logistics behind all of that. But I think it's important to note that, in addition to the operational considerations as we seek to scale our work at Spoonfuls, there are like policy and advocacy aspects that can influence how we operate. And I think more importantly, and what I'm going to share with you are sort of the areas in policy and advocacy that are really gaining some momentum and that are bringing, more potential to our work and the work like food recovery broadly. So I'm going to walk you through a bit of a timeline of the things that have been happening over the past several years in food loss and waste policy and advocacy. So in 2015, the United Nations developed its 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and that agenda included 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. And all UN member countries signed on to this agenda, agreeing to move forward trying to tackle those goals. So SDG number 12 is focused on responsible consumption and production, and it includes a target that sets out to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. So cut food loss and waste in half by 2030. The United States quickly followed suit, and it set its own food loss and waste reduction goal, which, no surprise, was cutting food loss and waste in half by 2030. So that is the path that the U.S. has been on since, I think, 2016 is when the U.S.'s plan came out, just after the UN agreement. And so the U.S. reduction goal involves really leveraging the authority and influence of the USDA, the FDA, and the EPA to work with their stakeholders and identify and really pursue interventions to reduce food loss and waste that keep food out of landfills. That's sort of the broad element there. A few years later, the No Time to Waste Act was introduced to Congress in 2023. And that's a bill that, if it were passed, would expand food loss and waste research and technology development and scale support of state and local food loss and waste policy solutions. And so a little bit of background here. I mentioned the UN goals in 2015, and here we are in 2023. But in between the two, food waste got its first nod in the Farm Bill. So in 2018, food waste was first mentioned in the United States Farm Bill, which probably many of you are familiar with the Farm Bill and its impact on SNAP. And, that's like kind of the debate every 5 years that a lot of us hear about. But the Farm Bill is this huge, broad policy. And in 2018, food waste got its first nod in the Farm Bill through the creation of a food loss and waste liaison position. So that was a person who was brought on board to coordinate efforts between the USDA, the FDA, and the EPA around food loss and waste specifically. So that was really kind of exciting progress towards that goal to have food loss and waste by 2030. And so the No Time to Waste Act, which came around in 2023, was really looking to expand on that role by bringing it from just a single person position to an entire office to manage that intergovernmental coordination. And so the office would, among other things, support regional coordination of food recovery efforts across the United States. So that would really enhance the ability of organizations like Spoonfuls to recover the food that's out there and get it to the people who need it. I think Spoonfuls faces this regularly. I think other food recovery organizations do as well. It's like, the food is out there, but where is it not being recovered? Because I think in many cases it's being recovered, but by a small partner on just a couple days, and there's like all these gaps. And so that kind of coordination could be really critical to just making sure everything that's out there to be recovered is getting recovered, and that food is feeding people and not landfills. And the No Time to Waste Act also includes provisions around education and awareness building. And so this is a really exciting piece. I mentioned 38% of food in the United States goes unsold or uneaten, and about half of that is generated at the household level. So awareness building can really go a long way in really impacting this issue and really just kind of shifting the perception around wasted food and really kind of bringing the value back into our food. The exciting thing about No Time to Waste Act is that the bill has bipartisan support. So advocates are hopeful that it will be passed as a marker bill when Farm Bill negotiations pick up again. They've been stalled for many, many months. So advocates are hopeful this one will make it through. Also in 2023, the Food Date Labeling Act was proposed. So I mentioned food date labels earlier. The Food Date Labeling Act, like the No Time to Waste Act, has a provision for consumer education and awareness, but in this case, it's specifically around food date labels. So confusion around food date labels is estimated to contribute to about 8% of wasted food in the United States. And households across the US are essentially discarding perfectly good food because they see the date that's passed and they mistakenly believe that the food is no longer good or safe to eat. But the truth is that food date labels aren't federally regulated. So, I think probably most people on this call are familiar with the patchwork of date labels out there. There's use by, best by, sell by, freeze by, my personal favorite, enjoy by. But there's really, what do those all mean? There's no regulation across the board. But what we can say is that by and large, date labels are meant to indicate peak freshness as determined by the manufacturer. So a lot of folks just think they're expiration dates. And so this legislation would really kind of bust that myth. The consumer education would clarify, what date labels are really all about. And further, the legislation would standardize the date labels. And so there would be two labels: use by for a product where there's a safety concern, and best if used by for a product that's just kind of like a quality or freshness concern. And so it's believed that this could really cut down on the amount of food that's needlessly being wasted because of date label confusion. And the state of California just passed a law nearly identical to this one being proposed on Capitol Hill. And, a lot of folks say as California goes, so goes the nation. So it will be interesting to see what happens next. I'm going to pause and see this question here from Jillian. The question is, we have a few food recovery organizations in our county. Although food is being recovered from grocery stores, there's still food that comes into our network of food pantries that cannot be used in the food pantry. The food is rotten when it arrives. Do you have any suggestions or ways to best communicate with our grocery stores about providing usable food and food recovery organizations to get food to pantries sooner? Yeah, that's a great question. So getting food to pantries sooner, that's why we operate with a fleet of refrigerated vehicles. So we don't put our food in a building ever. It comes onto the truck and it goes right off the truck. And so that for us, that was really about ensuring that peak freshness and making sure that this food that in some cases really should be used rather quickly gets into the hands of the people who can use it as quickly as possible. And as I said, in the case of the way we operate, it's often within hours. As far as communicating to grocery stores, it's absolutely something that we do here. We have a person who's dedicated to that kind of work, like really building the relationships with the folks in the stores and having conversations with them, whether it's like department by department saying like, hey, produce department, those strawberries last week were all pretty mushy and moldy, and just clarifying like, we're not taking the food to compost it, we're taking it to feed it to people. And it's really just sort of like a constant education process. We create like various pieces of collateral to share with the folks in the stores as well. And, it's usually helpful to have a point person who's sort of like the champion of the food recovery work. Thanks, Anna. Like a point person who's the champion of the food recovery work, who can really work with the staff in the store to make sure they understand what it's all about, because I think that's something we've seen even recently with partners we've been working with for years. The right conversation with the right person in the store makes you realize like, oh my gosh, they weren't even really clear where this food was going. And so I think sometimes it's just like, people need to understand where the food is going, and it's not going to a compost bin. Sometimes they need to, just a little bit more training on like, that's not really appropriate for human consumption. It should go in the compost bin. And then as kind of a backup, our team is trained to cull products. So before the team puts the food on the truck, they look at everything. You can see Holden here in this picture. He's looking at the date labels because we will take things at or near their date, but it depends on what type of product it is and what like the date range is. And we will take like a case of strawberries if there's like one or two mushy strawberries in there, but we're not going to take a case of strawberries that's covered in mold. So they're culling things. And if there's anything that's not appropriate for us to take, we leave it at the dock and we let the folks at the store put it in the trash. So yeah, so that's food date labeling. And then this year, the White House released the National Strategy to Reduce Food Loss and Waste. And so this is really building on the climate goals around food waste in the United States and really further acknowledges the food security impacts posed by the issue of wasted food. So the playbook for this strategy is very similar to the No Time to Waste Act, but it's not a bill that has to be passed. It's a strategy. It's a commitment that the Biden-Harris administration has made and is actively pursuing. So, it includes, like No Time to Waste, it includes investing in innovation, technology, infrastructure, and kind of like educational campaigns. It also leans on public-private partnerships and emphasizes the role that the industry can play in reducing the amount of wasted food in the U.S., which is, our partnerships with vendors is a perfect example of that. Again, this is a White House strategy, but as I mentioned previously, like food waste policy does have bipartisan support. So we are very hopeful with the new administration that this will move forward and stay strong. So all the policy initiatives I just described are really supporting the work that Spoonfuls does, and they make our resources available. They make more resources available to support our work. They create awareness about the issues underpinning it, and all of that helps it, makes it easier to talk to potential funders or to talk to our partners about what we do and like where the food is coming from. I think I mentioned it before, the need here for food in Massachusetts is massive and continues to grow. We're continuing to see demand that's like exceeding peak pandemic era demand. So there's really a lot of opportunity to scale this work and more need than ever out there. So the policy that I just described really makes it smoother. So with that, I just wanted to end on some things that you can do to take action. First and foremost, I think, is spreading the word. So, more awareness builds more momentum. I think there's value in spreading the word, professionally within your network. I think a lot of folks that we work with, even partners we deliver to, are not totally clear what food recovery is or how big the issue of wasted food is. But it's also like spreading it among your friends and family, because again, half of our wasted food in the United States is coming from the household level. So there's a role for all of us to play in understanding this issue. You can also urge Congress to pass measures to reduce wasted food, the No Time to Waste Act, the Food Date Labeling Act. Again, it's bipartisan. There's bipartisan support for those measures. So regardless of what district you're in, you could call your representatives in Congress and let them know these are important measures to pass. You can access our Spoonfuls advocacy toolkit, spoonfuls.org/advocacy. It is kind of like a primer on how to be an advocate, not just on these issues, but like any advocacy you're interested to do. And you can learn more by following Spoonfuls. You can find us at Spoonfuls Food Recovery. We talk about our advocacy priorities on there and try to keep folks up to date. And you can just follow along and see what we're up to. And I will pause in a moment for questions, but I wanted to get my contact up here. So, another way to keep in touch. If you want to reach out to me, I'm very happy to hear from you and share more. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'm really grateful to you all. I'm going to stop talking. I see that there's another question here from Russell. And if anybody else has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. The question from Russell is, do you have any advice on how to extend the food chain past the no longer distributable to humans, but is perfectly fine for animal food consumption? So I think this question is around like some And Russell, please feel free to like clarify if I'm not understanding your question fully, but I think this question is around like certain brands and some agencies have guidelines around what they believe is like no longer fit for human consumption, but it could go to animals for animal feed. And I think a lot of that is sort of baked into this broader issue, similar to the date label issue that I described, where there's sort of just there's not regulation and there's sort of a lot of arbitrary assignments of what when food is or is not appropriate to eat. When I think a lot of us know, milk hits its date, but you can drink that milk often a day or two beyond that date, and it's still perfectly good and tastes fine and is fine. So I think a little, I don't necessarily have advice on how to change the way others operate within this space, but I will say, yeah, right. Instead of throwing food away, there may be another week of life for. Oh, I see what you're saying, Russell. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. So I mean, so you're saying the food is not fit for human consumption, it could go to animals as well, which is actually, I think, what the EPA advises. So there's something called the food waste scale. And the first step on that scale is prevention, prevent food waste in the first place. But if the waste occurs, next step is ensuring if it's fit for human consumption, it should feed a human. And next step from there is it could feed an animal if it can't feed a human. And I think compost comes along at some point beyond those. But yeah, and that's, I think a lot of our partners do donate. They have partnerships with farms nearby where they're donating food to local farms. So animal feed is a good option, but I think too, I always caution, like, let's make sure the food is actually not fit for human consumption, and be careful not to just assume because the date is passed or the date is coming up on that label that it should be tossed or fed to an animal, because very often those dates are really quite premature. But yeah, and it looks like Carrot's got some thoughts for you too, Russell. So, but yeah, well, I want to say thank you to everyone who joined today. I hope that this was an enlightening conversation. And again, my email is here. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or just want to connect and learn more or share more. Always love connecting. So thank you all so much for your time.